David, what we've got prepared for today, I believe, may be our most consequential episode yet. Welcome back to David Hawkins' Reverse CSI. How are you, David?
I'm very well, Jason. Good to be with you.
It's good to see you as always. You know, it's funny, David, because I've really only been doing this whole, internet news thing, YouTubing, whatever you want to call it, for about 2 years. And I started this process on Crowdsource the Truth because I was extremely dissatisfied with the mainstream news and what was seen as acceptable journalism. So we engage in this process where people bring plausible information to us, and just as I've learned a federal judge in court will do, if the information is explained clearly and presented properly and seems plausible, it's at least given an opportunity to rise or fall when challenged with facts. And there are people who have come forward with various alleged facts, and we look at those facts. Many times they've been added into our research, and I think you and I have had an incredible synergy in terms of our vastly different backgrounds being able to come together and improve what we wouldn't be able to do on our own. The synergy has been really remarkable. And there's an individual who, almost from the moment I met you and Field McConnell, who sadly we're not really working with anymore, but almost from that very moment, this individual came forward and insisted you were lying to me. And I basically dismissed this individual out of hand because I found him very, I want to avoid insulting him because it's not what it's about, but I was repelled by him. I found him repulsive in his approach and his insistence that you were lying. Because to prove that someone's lying is a very tall order. I can accept that you or anyone might say something that could be incorrect, but proof of lying, that shows intent, deliberate intent, and I think we should talk about that a bit today. The guy I'm speaking of is someone who we haven't given too much credit on previous shows because, as I said, I just wanted to ignore and discount him. But I'd like to congratulate Kevin Alan Marsden today, David, because he's graduated. It's his first day in one of our wonderful photo collages, and he's revealed to us that he's Agent SERCO. He's driving the SERCO van in the collage, and of course the Secret Service logo is being scrubbed by another of our, let's call him a fan. But the reason why I want to mention Kevin Alan Marsden by name today is that he's crossed over from the realm of merely trolling fully into making false accusations, accusing you and I of crimes, including fraud and manipulation of evidence, things that I know that we haven't done. And it's curious, David, why would someone go to these great lengths? You might even say it falls into the category of spoliating, or at very least manipulating evidence.
Oh, totally. Well, I think the guy's gone off his meds. I mean, he's still struggling with trying to prove that I didn't go to Cambridge and that I should claim a Bachelor of Arts, which happens to be what Cambridge gives to people who graduate no matter what they're graduating in. And I graduated with the Mechanical Sciences Tripos. And he's struggling about me having a scholarship from Queen's College, Cambridge, and I've sent you the evidence for that. It's kind of irritating that I should have to prove anything to a B-team player, but I mean, this guy has really jumped the shark with some of his recent activities.
Yeah.
And again, congratulations on this collage. You and I discussed it at great length on what we should leave in and what we should leave out. And I know that I sometimes frustrate you because I want everything in the picture, but that's because, there's so much. Now, but should we just quickly look at the collage and what message it's sending? Okay, the people in the center are victims of what I think is a pedophile tracking system that is moving child pornography and hardcore adult pornography and online gaming systems, that is to say, where you might actually be sick enough to be betting on the time of death of little John Benet Ramsey or Jill Dando, who's the woman sitting down on the road there. The bets are being taken, or the opportunity to place those bets are being put into 4-star hotels frequented by some of the most powerful people around the world, including former presidents of the United States. And I'm not saying that they are placing bets on the times of death or the body counts. All I'm saying is they have the potential so to do. And of course, we have the plate signing ceremony by one Bill Clinton in the Salsa Bar and Grill in Queensland in Australia, which is, I think it's signed Bill Clinton, September the 11th, 2001, with 3 strong masculine underlining strokes, which I guess the guy is capable of doing. It's very interesting because I call that the alibi plate for Bill Clinton, because it's about the time, and of course there's references to the clocks or watches that you hung from the elbow of one Nicholas Soames, and also from Barack Hussein Obama. And the reference there, of course, is that the evil teachers, as we call them, that is to say the people or the teachers, members of faculty, connected through what is known as EduRome to the Electronic Visualization Laboratory at the University of Illinois in Chicago, these people have a very accurate knowledge of time, which is kind of important if you want to send a hit team to take out some victims, because you want the hit teams to know exactly what the time is, because, for example, you want someone, let's say, to shoot Jill Dando in the temple with a specially modified bullet. You probably want someone to take a picture of her being shot with a timestamp on it and send that to the people who need to silence Jill Dando. Now, why would they want to silence Jill Dando? Well, it turns out Jill Dando was a very capable presenter for the BBC program Crime Watch, and it so happened that what she was trying to do was alert the British public, and for that matter, probably people around the world, of the existence of a pedophile ring at the highest reaches of the British government and probably the military, and extending, I believe, into the United States, where you have Jeffrey Epstein flying Bill Clinton on the Lolita Express to that island, which is apparently burnt to the ground, although as a mechanical engineer or even just as a normal human being, I find it difficult to know how you burn an island to the ground. But anyway.
Now, David, may I interrupt for a moment? Because just last night, I actually had another conversation with former U.S. President Bill Clinton. I first spoke to him at his book signing, but I was up very late last night because I actually had an opportunity to attend an evening with the Clintons here at the Beacon Theater in New York City, and I'll be posting that later after our show. I should add, speaking of time, at 2 p.m. Eastern, you and I will be joined by former U.S. Secret Service agent John Carmen. John couldn't join us for the 1 p.m. preview here. He has an appointment that he's at, but he'll be with us at 2. And I want to remind everyone who's watching right now, it's very important that they hit the thumbs up and that they share our videos, because as we've been saying for months, there is an organized group of people who find it necessary to use false information and taunting threats and ridiculous videos to try to dissuade people from watching the videos that you and I produce, which I feel are sharing very important information. And as you've always told me, spoliation of evidence allows us an aggressive inference of guilt. So again, there's a number of reasons why people might not like to watch any of the videos that I put out, but I think most people would just turn it off and not watch it. The fact that we've been pursued for 2 years by these guys who are making all these insistences that you are lying and that I'm this or that, they've proven themselves to be completely invalid. And it takes me back to our friend Mr. Marsden here, who took it upon himself to contact the Washington Post. And I made a video earlier today of the phone call that I had with the customer service department of the Washington Post, in which they shared with me the communication that he had presented to them. And specifically it had to do with this phrase that you had introduced me to. I'd never heard of it before, the Mendenhall. this Mendenhall's baby. And as people may recall, that was a phrase that you had said was in a Washington Post article dated August 8th of 1979 about this woman, Christine Marcy. She's the sister of Field McConnell, your former partner in radio broadcasting, and someone that we don't speak to really too much anymore. But Field has told me a number of things about this woman. It's his sister. So just like that federal court, when someone presents plausible information and it's presented in a cohesive manner, we presume it to be true until we can prove it false. Now, this article in the Washington Post that contains the Mendenhall reference, I want to just take people back for a moment, and I'm sorry if I'm using a lot of time here, but I think it's important that we give people the background. Tell me again, David, how did you first come across this information, and how did we come to understand what the phrase Mendenhall means?
Oh, well, so when Field McConnell, probably around the 6th of December of 2006, spoke to me the first time, we had a rather interesting dialogue. You know, I was introduced to Field through another pilot who I believe has been on your show, or may have been on your show. And I called Field because I was very anxious at that time, having done years of research into the events leading up to the 9/11 attack on America. I, as a mechanical engineer, but not necessarily because I'm a mechanical engineer, I felt that I've been able to analyze the demolition of the Twin Towers, building number 7, and the attack on the Pentagon from the point of view of someone who has some expertise in explosives. And the conversation went roughly like this, I think, from memory. Hello, Field. I've been told that you are a military pilot. Is that true? And he said, yes. I said also that you are a civilian pilot. And he said, yes. And I said, are you a drunk, right? Because I felt that he was slurring his speech. He didn't take offense, which is interesting because he could have hung up on me. And I don't say that necessarily that he'd been drinking. But anyway, that's where the conversation started, because I needed someone with significant experience in both civilian and fighter jet, with a background to, I guess, ground truth my theory about how these targets were selected and taken out. Anyway, the conversation then moved rapidly onwards, and he didn't hang up, and for that I thank him greatly, because I started talking about, for whatever reason, bureaucracy. It was a long time ago, and he said he had a bureaucrat sister in Washington, but he didn't really know what she did. So one of the things I do, as you know, is start researching, and eventually I found some of the things about Christine Marcy that made my jaw drop. And I guess about 2 years ago, maybe we can check the references, I found this article in the Washington Post about Christine Marcy, and if you scroll down that article,
well,
and I think, if I understand you correctly, it's been digitally altered.
Right. That's what we're going to get into. Now, David, the comments are telling me I may have just misspoken. Of course, I fully support the concept that any person is innocent until proven guilty. However, what I'm learning from the federal lawsuits that are being showered upon me, in part by these social engineers who want to stop Crowdsource the Truth from moving forward, is that the federal court considers plausible claims to be true if they're properly stated. So that means when you enter a claim, the court says, okay, let's presume this to be true. Defendant, give us your evidence to disprove it. And I'm just saying, if someone comes to me and tells me, you know, they're Elvis and a space alien, I might not believe that. But if you tell me Field McConnell has a sister who was working in the government, who was involved in the formation of the SES, and here's an article about her in the Washington Post talking about her role as a supergrade, well, these are plausible statements that I accept as true. And now, if someone comes along and can disprove any of this, then we'll change our hypothesis. So I'm not saying that people are innocent until proven, I'm getting all tongue-tied. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, but plausible claims are entertained until disproven. That's what I'm saying. So in this article, which interestingly, David, has been changed, the URL people can see has got a 325 in it. It's 2019, March 25th. This article has been changed. And in my phone call earlier this morning to the Washington Post, they allow you to call them and alert them to errors in their articles. They told me that Mr. Marsden, and people can see this on his Kevin Alan Marsden YouTube channel, which I now will promote so that people can go there and see firsthand with their own eyes how this man is disseminating known false statements, accusing you and I of fraud, accusing us of lying wrongfully. And in fact, I'm going to right now advise him to retract all of these statements, issue a public apology, recant everything that he has said about you and I, and I would also offer that it's a good idea for him to cease and desist from speaking about us unless he has true and factual things to say. But the point is, this article talks about how Christine Marcy was making her way in the professional world in 1979 as both a high-level government executive and a mother. And, you know, this was a breakthrough at that time. Women obviously weren't as, you know, there weren't as many women in the workplace in 1979 as there are now. And the thing that was strange about this article was it used to say Mendenhall's baby was due in early August. Now, in some of his most recent videos, Kevin Marsden is reviewing various iterations of this article. Certainly, people can cut and paste text out of a web page and put it anywhere they want. I don't take responsibility for web pages made by Abel Danger or, you know, who ever might be making web pages. I don't use those as reference or think that they're true. But certainly the Washington Post is a paper of record, very respected source of information for many. And I at least consider that information at thewashingtonpost.com has been put there by the Washington Post and is endorsed by them as being accurate and correct. Now, right away, when you brought this article to my attention, we noticed a number of typos, typographical errors in the article, including the misspelling of Christine Marcy's last name in the very first line. Before March 25th, 2019, this thing said Christine Mary, and she had her first chili 2.5 years ago. And I do remember when we first looked at this, you brought that to my attention, and I thought it odd that the Washington Post would have such glaring typos in it, and then I just sort of dismissed that idea. Now, separately, when I was doing some research into something in the New York Times, oh yes, it was William Barr, our current Attorney General. I went back to look at what William Barr was doing in 1992, and I noticed instead of taking me to a normal New York Times type web page, it took me to this interesting little animated logo of the decorative T that the New York Times uses, and it presented a scan of the newspaper and some text next to that, which also had quite a lot of typos in it. Why am I not able to get to the New York Times here? And it occurred to me that for legacy articles that were written prior to the digital layout of a newspaper like the New York Times, they were very likely scanning the original films used to print the newspaper and then doing a process called OCR, optical character recognition, where scanned letters get interpreted by the computer and it turns it into text. Now, this is an amazing process, the fact that it works at all, but of course it is subject to errors. The thing makes mistakes, and a word like child turns into chili, a word like Marcy turns into Mary, and so it occurred to me that was probably what happened to that original article. And when Mr. Marsden insisted that you were lying about this Mendenhall thing, that didn't add up to me. That didn't seem like irrefutable evidence. However, when I call the Washington Post and speak to a woman there who I don't know, who I've never spoken to before, who I have no influence over, and I give her the very ticket number that Kevin Alan Marsden gives to everyone on his YouTube channel, and she reads me his email, well, that seems like irrefutable evidence that he's called them and said all these things. And he now is saying that you and I manipulated the Washington Post to remove that Mendenhall phrase And I don't know, he said a bunch of other nonsense that we did something to the Able Danger webpage or some webpage in Holland. I mean, the guy is basically, you know, he's speaking a lot of nonsense, so it's hard to know what he's saying. But I will present later today, when we have our friend John Carmen with us on the subscriber-only version of the show on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. We're going to be reviewing the, I think, irrefutable evidence that Mr. Marsden is lying. There's already a good deal of extremely strong evidence in that phone call with the Washington Post, but I think people are going to be blown away, and they're going to want to tune in to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I know you've identified a number of duties that the Secret Service are mandated to carry out. And David, can you tell us a little bit about that and how these self-proclaimed agents of SERCO are preventing these types of investigations from happening?
Well, totally. And the intriguing thing is, this Marsden guy, I don't know whether he's off his meds or he's just got some kind of limitations, but he describes himself as a SERCO agent or agent SERCO. Now, just as he's written to various players relating to what he thinks we're doing to the reputation of Christine Marcy, if he's writing in the name of SERCO and SERCO doesn't rebut what he's saying, of course, SERCO may be held to be responsible for the effects of Marsden's libels, if you will. Now, this is a problem for SERCO because my experience of major corporations, you know, I've worked for two, the Central Electricity Generating Board and the Schlumberger International Services, etc., is they have legal advisors who look very carefully when anyone is acting in their name or claims to be acting in their name. Well, Marsden is acting in the name of SERCO. Now, very quickly, if we can go back, it was a SERCO truck that picked up Mr. Assange yesterday, right? So as far as I'm concerned, Julian Assange is now in the custody of a private company owned by its shareholders, which includes the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the British government and the Singaporean government, 10 global custodians with assets under management of over $100 trillion, the state of California, and 2 pension funds, which are very interesting, apropos the evil teachers, one being the TIAA, the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, which is the world's largest private pension fund, and the University Superannuation Scheme, which is the United Kingdom's largest private pension fund, which obviously, by their very statement, represent the pension benefits of people like Barack Obama, the person standing, you know, on the other side of his watch, which is, anyway, that's Michelle Obama, apparently. Robust-looking female, I would think. And then behind these two is Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, where Bill Ayers was on faculty for decades at the University of Illinois, Chicago, which hosts the Electronic Visualization Laboratory, and Bernardine Dawn, who's on Northwestern University faculty for decades. And this is a woman who lectures or has a seminar on torture, paradigms, and practice. And then, of course, up against the wall with your marvelous collage, you've got Bill Clinton giving the thumbs up. So I'm not quite answering your question, but there's so many interesting areas. Yeah. I believe we had an experience with an admirer of Bill Clinton the other day.
Right. People will see that later today when I post the video. Mr. Clinton last night said, as he was lauding the very questionable Clinton Foundation, Charles Ortel has presented us with a number of elements of evidence to indicate that it is an absolute financial scam. Mr. Clinton was talking about the great work that they do traveling around the world selling AIDS drugs. And so at the end of the presentation, I walked up to the stage and people were shaking Bill Clinton's hand and saying hello. And I asked him, Mr. President, how can you possibly think that selling pharmaceutical products is charity work? he's a pharmaceutical salesman, and it's totally illegal for a charity to sell pharmaceuticals. But before he was able to answer, a crazed Clintonite grabbed me. A woman physically grabbed my arm, grabbed my phone out of my hand, and the recording stopped. I was very upset. It was certainly uncivilized. And speaking on uncivilized, I know these are social engineers in the comments, and forgive me for, you know, addressing that, but someone is questioning, David, my advice that people tune into patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth to view this evidence from the Washington Post. Certainly no one is obligated to watch this show, and they can just turn it off and leave if they don't like the policy, but there are a number of reasons why we want people to subscribe to our channels and support what we're doing. First of all, you and I need food to stay alive, and when we spend all of our time working on this, it's only reasonable that people should expect that there's some sort of financial compensation. But there's another thing going on. That's a comment put in there very likely by a social engineer who wants to undermine the financing of Crowdsource the Truth. I'm trying to change the model for how news is given to people. I certainly subscribe to the Washington Post, and even Marsden said he had to subscribe to the Washington Post to carry out his malicious attack on us. So everyone who's in business and functioning in society needs a way to get money, and if anyone is watching this show and enjoying it, I don't think it's unreasonable for them to subscribe to the show for a couple of dollars. But, you know, earlier this morning, I received an email from YouTube that the main YouTube channel is under attack yet again. There's been a strike put in for harassment, threats, and cyberbullying. On this video, Ole Damigard and Cody Snodgrass, Parkland, Dallas, and Austin. Now, this was a video created last year in which Ole Damigard, who is an internationally respected researcher and author, joined myself and Cody Snodgrass on the program where we were talking about the school shooting that took place in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School there in Florida, and the video's been removed. But the thing is, it's this video was removed last year. This video was originally uploaded March 30th, 2008, and it received a strike that shut the channel down. So I'm not sure how this happened, but definitely someone is targeting Crowdsource the Truth to take it out. So if people want to continue to see the show, very soon, maybe even by 2 o'clock, their only option might be patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth, and for David Hawkins Reverse CSI, of course, patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. So anyone who doesn't like the policy doesn't need to watch, but people who support the show and want it to continue should really become subscribers. And not just that, David, it's very beneficial if they share the links, share the show with friends, and help us grow this program. There is a persistent group of people who are using lies, who are fraudulently creating evidence, and who are trying to smear you and I to stop this information from coming out. And in the same way that spoliation of evidence allows us an aggressive inference of guilt, I would say the intentional destruction of Crowdsource the Truth allows us to infer that we are on to some very serious information that some extremely powerful people do not want the public to know about.
You're absolutely right, and I urge the lawyers representing SERCO to take a look at Kevin Marsden, who appears to be acting in the company's name, to make sure that he doesn't damage the viability of the shareholders whose representatives met on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11, when SERCO's chief executive officer left the windows of the World Breakfast meeting, probably around 8:30, at the top of the North Tower, hopped into the elevator, and of course anyone who traveled with him survived, but anyone he left behind got, well, dare I say it, obliterated, which is kind of chilling, because that was a meeting of the Risk Waters Group, and some of their clients and associates at the breakfast meeting on the Windows of the World restaurant. And of course, they suffered a very high body count, which appears to be the subject of death pool betting on systems confiscated from StarNet Communications. But I digress. The important thing, the question you asked me earlier, was what role does the Secret Service have in some of these kinds of crimes, and to what extent has the data or evidence needed by the Secret Service to solve the crimes been scrubbed or filtered by, for example, SERCO or one of the patented devices in its custody. So obviously, and in the Patreon show only coming after this, we're going to learn a lot more from John Carman. But it's most interesting because it was only about 3 days ago, and I think probably Americans don't know the extent to which the Secret Service has been qualified by the government to investigate such crimes, and I think I'll read that to make sure I don't slip out. The Secret Service is charged with conducting criminal investigations and protecting the nation's leaders. And until 2003, the Secret Service was part of the Department of the Treasury, as the agency was originally founded to combat the then widespread counterfeiting of US currency. And the Secret Service safeguards the payment and financial systems of the United States from a wide range of financial and electronic-based crimes. Now, you and I have discussed at great length the possibility that the shareholders of SERCO that met on the 47th floor might have been engaged in a catastrophe bond fraud, where the catastrophe bond had been sponsored by people who were concerned at the possibility of being wiped out if both towers came down on the same day through fire. That, I think, would be a double black swan event, as it's called, where the black swan passes by you with another black swan immediately in tow, where the collective intelligence of the two black swans is over 300 IQ points, right? So it's an extremely unlikely event that I believe was peddled by these conspirators to the two big teachers' pension fund as an extremely unlikely to happen, and therefore the pension funds, and I can't prove that, but I think one day we will prove something like it, where the two pension funds were persuaded to act as an investors for what was a fraudulent cat bond and put down a substantial amount of money because they thought it was extremely unlikely that one and then two steel frame buildings would collapse through fire. Of course, they were blown up, and I think we can explain how they were blown up. So going on with the definition of what the United States Secret Service does, financial investigations include counterfeit US currency, bank and financial institution fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, illicit financing operations, and major conspiracies, which I think these people that are acting in the name of SERCO are engaged in with or without the consent or knowledge of the SERCO company and its shareholders. Electronic investigations include cybercrime, network intrusions. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but isn't that what Sweigert does as an ethical hacker?
Well, David, this whole thing practically reads like his resume.
Exactly. Identity theft, access device fraud, credit card fraud, and intellectual property crimes. Well, intellectual property crimes, in my book, relate to my experience with the patents I took out, applied for in the 1980s, the deductive computing machine and the object-oriented fractal paintbrush, of which I'm very proud. They're documented. I ran out of money to, prosecute those patents because it's very expensive.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that what I invented back in the 1980s was adopted and used as a weapon by people like SERCO and its shareholders. The Secret Service is a key member of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. Great job you guys did on 911, but anyway, which investigates and combats terrorism on a national and international scale, as well as the high-intensity drug trafficking areas task force, which seeks to reduce and eliminate drug trafficking in critical regions of the United States. Well, Canada was described by the former Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Mr. Zaccardelli, in 2000 at a law enforcement conference in Toronto, as the hub of international drug trafficking, money laundering, and organized fraud. So obviously I'd be very interested to know is what did the Secret Service do about that extraordinary claim, and start looking seriously hard at Canada and British Columbia actually in particular as to a view as to its support for international drug trafficking, organized fraud, and money laundering. Anyway, it goes on, and this is the part that was a jaw dropper for me. The Secret Service also investigates missing and exploited children and is a core partner of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. So back to your collage, Jason. Who created and launched the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children? It was Christine Marcy, Phil McConnell's sister. Now that's an interesting asset for the police or law enforcement to have access to, because if you really wanted to stop the trafficking of children borrowed, rented, or bought from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, you'd expect to see the FBI acting very aggressively with the United States Secret Service. But as you've got the scrubbing over on the right or left of that truck, you've got Mr. Sweigert with the scrubbing brush, and he's scrubbing, apparently, the United States Secret Service. And what I'm suggesting he's doing, he's desperately scrubbing the data from the United States Secret Service agents who would otherwise be able to roll up these child trafficking rings kind of quickly. So now we've got this extraordinary situation where who was the father of Mendenhall's baby?
Exactly.
It's not in dispute. I think that was published by the Washington Post.
No, it is. Kevin Marsden has put it into dispute this morning, or yesterday, or whenever he put that out.
But up to the time he put it in dispute, I think you and I and our listeners assumed, or even if they couldn't explain it, and I'm not 100% explaining it, but I do note that Mr. Marsden used some interesting phraseology, of which I'm not familiar. One phrase is daddy humping. Have you heard of, maybe you could check what
daddy chasing or something like that. He's trying to be insulting. I mean, he's really on like a junior high school level with that. But you're right. He seems to be in touch with some of these, you know, bizarre slang sexual terms. So he would be someone who I would expect might know the meaning of Mendenhalling.
Absolutely. Now, so the Mendenhall baby phrase that I touched on or found in that article. So then I Google Mendenhall, and I find in the Urban Dictionary, maybe so I don't shock your listeners and look to be having some prurient interest in this stuff.
Let
maybe
me bring it up here.
You could tell the listeners or remind the listeners what Mendenhalling means as a verb.
Urban Dictionary. Now, there's this magazine that you and I have spoken about called like Viz or something like that, which is like a British humor magazine that sometimes has these strange phrases in it. So, you know, certainly questioning where this definition came from is absolutely okay. But again, when it's presented, you looked it up in the Urban Dictionary, and the Urban Dictionary tells us that Mendenhall means to mount someone from behind while they are in the fetal position on the ground. After the deed is complete, you roll them over and see the humiliation in their eyes. This is best accomplished in front of a large audience. Now, let me just point out, David, we're not trying to make a joke out of this. This is describing rape, and that's not funny. But of course, you've spoken quite a bit about some of these secret societies and how they have a need to indoctrinate their members through hazing practices that are so humiliating and so embarrassing, so as to make certain that a person would not reveal any of the secrets of the secret society. So the concept that someone would be subjected to this type of rape, either engaging in it or being subjected to it in order to enter a secret society, that's a very real possibility. So along the lines of the federal rules of civil procedure in court, you know, when a plausible definition is given, we accept it until it is proven to not be true or correct. Now, along the lines of what some of the people who maybe don't like the policy of you and I wanting to be able to purchase food and creating a subscriber-only show, people who might object to that policy, I just want to let people know that, as I said in my phone call with the Washington Post this morning, I'm just getting very slow performance on the computer. I'm trying to bring this up for us here. I'm going to show everyone the nature of what we'll be looking at on the show, because again, you know, I think that web pages and computer networks are very susceptible to manipulation, particularly when the people that we're dealing with are in fact hackers, ethical or not. I think that's a subjective term. So what I did was, rather than just going and looking at an Able Danger web page or a Washington Post web page that tells us it's been modified on March 25th, when you and I for sure have looked at that article before and seen it say Mendenhall's baby, I went and I obtained, David, the microfilm of the original Washington Post article from August 8th, I believe it is, 1979. We've got it right here. Yes, Wednesday, August 8th, 1979. People could see that there. And you can see that this is, you know, newspapers were black and white at that time, printed with a halftone process. So this is a photographic reproduction of the newspaper as it would have appeared on that day in August 1979. Here's the article by Judy Mann, and of course we can see it says Christine Marcy, not Christine Mary, now a super grade in the Office of Professional Management, had her first child, not her first chili. Maybe she had a chili at a Mexican restaurant, but it's not worthy of writing about in the Washington Post. And David, even just from observing this microfilm, you can start to see how this optical character recognition process might break down. The scan of the word child has a small break in the top of the D right there, which perhaps might fool a computer into thinking it's an E. There are a number of things that can cause optical character recognition to fail. So we're almost out of time. We've got just about 2 minutes, 3 minutes before we shift over to our subscriber-only show on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth, and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. But people who are interested in seeing what lies below the fold, as it were, in this scanned reproduction of the original article from the Washington Post, well, they can tune in and see. But I assure our audience and Mr. Marsden that we do rely on evidence, and that's not to say that we can't make mistakes, but I don't jump to the conclusion that people are lying simply because a mistake is made. So it'll be interesting to tune in and see that. David, was there anything else you wanted to share with our viewers here on the preview show before we head over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's assume that Mendenhall's baby was conceived in around August or November of 1978. What's very interesting there is that Mr. Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill, was around that time acting as the personal assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is kind of interesting because the Appropriations Committee is the most powerful committee, as I understand it, in the Senate, and would have been able to fund the development of, for example, an international network that connected teachers, the evil teachers, to major crimes such as the one we're discussing. Over to you.
And of course, that would have placed him in Washington, D.C., where he could have interfaced with reporters from the Washington Post. He could have gotten his own copy of the Washington Post to read. And David, I would postulate that it's very possible that this article in the Washington Post, written by Judy Mann, could be utilizing a technique called steganography, wherein a message is encoded in plain sight. And in 1979, it might be very difficult to get a message in a widespread kind of a way to a network of individuals. You didn't have email, and people didn't have cell phones or the internet, so disseminating coded messages would have been very effectively done by placing a strange thing like talking about Mendenhall's baby in the middle of an article when no one expects to see that. So David, I'll see you in just a few minutes over at patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. We'll be joined by John Carmen, former U.S. Secret Service agent, and we'll continue this exploration into the bizarre assault on Crowdsource the Truth, my personal integrity, your personal integrity, and people who want to defund this operation effectively to scrub the truth.
By the agents of SERCO.
Indeed. We'll see you over there, David.
Thank you, Jason.